The autumn of 1859 pressed over the tiny Louisiana settlement of Meow Creek like a damp, suffocating veil. The kind of season where the air feels too heavy to breathe, and the nights seem to hold their breath. It was here, in this forgotten corner of the American South, that a 7-year-old enslaved boy named Samuel Carter became the subject of one of the strangest and most terrifying medical cases ever recorded before the Civil War. At first glance, he seemed like any other child, small, thin, watchful, but there was something unsettling behind those dark eyes that rarely blinked. Something too old, something too knowing, and for 7 months, 9 people died soon after crossing his path, each found with their eyes locked open in expressions of terror, as if they had witnessed something no living human should ever see. Dr. Elizabeth Monroe, the only formally trained physician in a region still ruled by midwives and folk healers, documented Samuel's every moment in 2 leather-bound journals. Her accounts describe a boy who should have been ordinary, yet spoke of things he could not possibly know: detailed anatomy, diseases not yet visible, and private dreams that people had never dared share aloud. Samuel said these revelations came from voices in the swamp, whispers that carried secrets from beyond human understanding. And before we descend deeper into this unsettling tale, make sure to subscribe and comment where you're listening from. Your support keeps the forgotten liturgy alive as we unravel the darkest mysteries in American history. Much of the official record vanished during the chaos of the Civil War, but Dr. Monroe's journals survived, hidden for more than a century in the dusty attic of her abandoned home. What they reveal, isn't just the story of a strange child, it's a confrontation with the limits of the human mind, a challenge to the racial lies that underpinned the world around him, and a reminder of how many brilliant black lives were suppressed, silenced, or destroyed for daring to exist outside the boundaries slavery imposed. Samuel had been born on the massive Whitmore plantation in the spring of 1852. His mother, Esther, a house servant, had secretly learned to read in defiance of the law and used stolen moments to teach her son by tracing letters in the dirt. Samuel's father had been sold long before the boy could remember his face. At 4 years old, Samuel watched his mother waste away from an untreated illness, as the plantation owner refused medical help for anyone he considered property. Samuel stayed at her bedside, whispering disturbingly accurate predictions about her illness, describing the roots spreading through her chest long before any adult recognized the severity. She died in early 1856, and Samuel, still only a small child, stood at her burial without shedding a tear. When asked why, he replied softly, "She's not gone. She talks to me now, same as the others in the swamp." From that moment on, the enslaved community began to fear him. His eyes lingered too long, too deep, as if he could see through flesh into the thoughts beneath. Elder Eremia, old enough to remember the stories brought by ships from across the ocean, whispered that Samuel had been born with a veil, the ability to see both the living and the dead. Even the plantation owner, Robert Whitmore, felt unease. The boy was too intelligent, too observant, and when Whitmore caught Samuel drawing detailed diagrams of the human heart in the dirt, complete with handwritten labels, he demanded to know where he learned such things. Samuel answered calmly, "The voices teach me. They show me the body like a house. When the house breaks, the person inside leaves." His answer chilled Whitmore more than any threat could have, because Samuel's very existence threatened the lie upon which Whitmore's power rested. If a black child with no formal education could produce knowledge exceeding that of white men supposedly born superior, what did that say about the entire system of slavery? Samuel was too brilliant, too aware, too dangerous to the myth. And so Whitmore made a decision. In the summer of 1856, before Samuel turned 5, he sold the boy to a slave trader passing through the parish. Samuel was torn from the only community he had left, transported up the Mississippi River like a curiosity. His intelligence made him too valuable for field labor. He would be sold as an oddity, perhaps a medical specimen for wealthy men who collected human anomalies. But Samuel Carter would never reach the auction block. The journey that carried Samuel away from the Whitmore plantation came to an abrupt end in the tiny settlement of Monroe Creek. The slave trader who had purchased him, a hard-eyed man named Cyrus Blackwood, collapsed without warning in the middle of a humid Louisiana afternoon. Witnesses later recalled how he convulsed so violently that the bed frame snapped beneath him. blood spilling from his nose and ears, as though something inside him had simply ruptured. The local doctor could offer no explanation, and through it all, Samuel stood in the corner of the boarding house room, watching with those same still, unblinking eyes as Blackwood screamed and thrashed. When the sheriff demanded to know what had happened, the boy answered with unsettling calm. "He hurt children," he said. "The voices told me what he did. They said his time was finished." The statement might have been dismissed as the strange imagination of a frightened child, but the investigation into Blackwood's past revealed a trail of horrors stretching back 5 years. Enslaved children in his custody had died in suspicious numbers, their disappearances explained as runaways or tragic accidents, their bodies found in rivers, their deaths attributed to illnesses that struck at convenient times. Samuel could not have known any of this through ordinary means. Yet the secrets buried in Blackwood as history seemed to rise to the surface the moment the boy spoke. With Blackwood dead and no legal owner to claim Samuel, the 7-year-old found himself in an impossible position. Technically free, but in a world where freedom meant very little for a black child alone in 1856, Louisiana. The authorities attempted to place him in an orphanage, but every institution turned him away. No white family would adopt him, and the few willing to take in a child refused once they learned of his strange behavior and unsettling reputation. He was too young to be put to work, too sharp to be ignored, and too mysterious for anyone to take responsibility for. It was Dr. Elizabeth Monroe who stepped forward. Unlike most physicians of her time, she had trained in Philadelphia and returned to Louisiana, determined to practice real medicine, not the superstition-driven healthcare that dominated rural communities. She lived independently on land inherited from her father and quietly opposed slavery, a dangerous stance to hold in the Deep South. When she heard about the boy who had been present for Cyrus Blackwood's death, her clinical instincts were stirred. When she finally met Samuel face to face, something far deeper took hold: fear, fascination, and a sense of moral duty that eclipsed her hesitation. "What is your name?" she asked when the sheriff brought the child to a doorstep, clearly relieved to find someone willing to take him in. "Samuel Carter," he replied softly. "My mama named me Samuel because it means God is heard." She said, "I was born to hear things others couldn't hear, to know things others didn't know." The voices started before I knew how to talk back. Dr. Monroe had never been a woman to entertain folklore or superstition. Her training had shaped her into someone who placed absolute trust in observation, evidence, and reason. But Samuel's presence disrupted every rule she had ever relied on. He spoke with a poise and precision no child his age should possess. He articulated anatomical structures with the clarity of a surgeon, not a boy stolen from a plantation. And when he described the voices, he did so with a calm certainty that sent a cold ripple across her rational mind. She made him an offer. He could stay in her home, not as a servant, not as a ward, but as a subject of study, a child whose extraordinary mind she wished to understand. She promised him shelter, education, kindness, and the freedom to leave whenever he chose. In return, she asked only for his cooperation in documenting the abilities that made him so unsettling. Samuel listened, his expression unreadable. "The voices say you're different," he murmured. "They say you see people as people, not as property. They say you want to understand things most folks are too scared to look at. I'll stay. But you should know something. People who come near me carrying harm or darkness, they don't live long. I don't kill them. I just know. And sometimes the voices make death come sooner." Any ordinary person would have recoiled from such a confession. For Dr. Monroe, it only deepened the strange pull she felt toward him. Her studies had exposed her to unusual minds prodigies with terrifying memory, savants who could calculate complex equations in seconds, children who mimicked entire musical compositions after hearing them once. But Samuel was something else entirely. His intelligence wasn't learned. It seemed inherent, instinctive. His knowledge didn't come from observation. It appeared unbidden, as if whispered from a source beyond reach. In August of 1856, just weeks after Samuel entered her home, Dr. Monroe began recording their daily interactions. Every conversation, every prediction, every inexplicable moment was preserved in her growing stack of journals, and what she documented would challenge her understanding of reality for the rest of her life. Samuel Carter could describe the internal organs of the human body with flawless accuracy, structures he had never seen, never studied, never touched. Samuel's strange abilities only seemed to grow the longer he stayed under Dr. Monroe's roof. Though he had never seen an anatomy book or observed so much as a basic medical procedure, he could sense illness long before it appeared, predicting sickness weeks ahead of the first symptom. He somehow knew intimate details about strangers' lives, things they had never spoken aloud, buried fears, hidden sins. Dr. Monroe, trained in science and reason, asked him again and again how he could possibly know such things. Samuel always gave the same quiet answer. The voices spoke to him. They came from the swamp, from the place where the dead wander. Instead of rest, from people who had died with unfinished business and truths that refused to stay buried. He said they chose him because he was born with the ability to hear them, a gift that ran through generations of his family, a gift and a curse. He knew things he wished he didn't. He saw things he longed to forget. The first death after Samuel arrived came in the fall of 1856. Marcus Dunton, a wealthy plantation owner from a nearby parish, stopped at Dr. Monroe's home seeking help for persistent stomach pain. Samuel happened to be inside when the man arrived, and his response was instant and unnervingly intense. The boy backed away as if recognizing something vile, his eyes filled with a terror far too old for a child. "You shouldn't be here," he whispered, but his voice carried an eerie authority. He said the voices were screaming about Thornton, accusing him of murdering 3 children, 2 boys and a little girl, and burying their bodies in the unmarked slave cemetery behind his plantation. He said the children cried at night, and their mothers still searched for them. Thornton's face shifted from pale shock to furious red. He turned on Dr. Monroe, demanding she controlled her property or he'd have the boy whipped. But beneath his bluster was something unmistakable, real fear. The kind a man shows only when a secret he believed absolutely hidden is suddenly dragged into daylight. Dr. Monroe stood her ground, reminding Thornton that Samuel was not property and asking him to leave at once. He stormed out, angrier than when he arrived. But 3 days later, he was found dead in his carriage. The official cause was listed as heart failure, but his eyes were frozen wide in terror and his mouth hung open as if he had died mid. Bruises shaped like fingers marked his neck, though he'd been traveling alone. When Dr. Monroe returned home and relayed the news, Samuel barely reacted. He simply said the voices had warned him Thornton wouldn't make it home, that the children he killed were waiting for him on the road, ready to collect a debt he could no longer escape. Dr. Monroe tried to ask whether Samuel had somehow caused the man's death, but he shook his head. He didn't cause anything. He only heard what was coming. An investigation into Thornton's plantation soon uncovered exactly what Samuel had described. 3 small bodies lay beneath the earth of the old cemetery, each one showing signs of a cruelty far beyond the brutality of enslavement. The mark of a man whose power had insulated him from consequence. Freed from fear at last, those enslaved at the plantation spoke openly about the children who vanished. The screams heard from Thornton's private quarters, and the monster who walked among them disguised as a gentleman. Samuel had known every detail the moment he laid eyes on the man. The second death followed only weeks later. Reverend Silas Jameson, the highly respected pastor of Meow Creek, was a man who preached charity on Sundays, while quietly profiting from the sale and separation of enslaved families during the week. In the eyes of the white townspeople, he was a pillar of righteousness. To the black community, he was something far darker. Samuel met him by chance at the general store while accompanying Dr. Monroe. The Reverend greeted them with his polished smile, warning her of the danger in educating people beyond their place. But Samuel stared straight through him and spoke with chilling clarity. He said the Reverend didn't believe in God, not since the day he sold a woman and her infant to different buyers, a cruelty that drove the woman to suicide and left the child dead within a month. Samuel said the voices told him Jameson heard that woman crying in his dreams every night, that he drank himself to sleep, trying to drown the memory, and that his time was drawing near. Whatever mask Jameson normally wore shattered instantly. He called Samuel demon-possessed, accused him of blasphemy, and fled the store in a panic. 2 weeks later, he was found dead in his study with an empty bottle of laudanum beside him. Though ruled a suicide, his eyes held the same frozen terror Thornton had worn. Scattered across his desk were letters, apologies to the many lives he'd torn apart. One to a woman named Sarah remained unfinished. the final line breaking mid-sentence, as though something had stopped him cold. That evening, when Dr. Monroe returned home, shaken and unsure how to process what she'd seen, she found Samuel calmly reading in the parlor. His expression was the same quiet sadness she had come to recognize. He told her the Reverend simply couldn't live with what he'd done anymore. The voices followed him everywhere, whispering the names of every person he had hurt, every family he had destroyed. Samuel told Dr. Monroe that the voices had shown him everything about Sarah's child. How the infant died, far from his mother, crying until the very end. The Reverend had always known his actions were wrong, Samuel said. He just chose status and wealth over humanity, and the voices did not forgive choices made in cold blood. Dr. Monroe sank into her chair, her medical training warring with the impossible evidence piling up around her. She warned Samuel that what was happening had become dangerous. People were dying after crossing his path, and though he wasn't causing their deaths, the pattern was impossible to ignore. Fear was growing in town. Some already whispered that he was unnatural, something cursed. If more people died, she might not be able to protect him from accusations of witchcraft or demonic influence. Samuel closed his book and looked at her with a sadness far older than his years. He said he had always known this day would come. His mother had taught him to hide his gift, to keep Kit, to never let white folks see what he could truly do. But sometimes the voices became too loud, showing him horrors so unbearable that silence felt like complicity. He didn't ask for the ability, but he carried it, and the voices insisted he was meant to reveal truths others wished to bury. The deaths continued. Only those marked by the voices, those who had committed cruelty without consequence, met their end. William Drake, a vicious slave catcher who treated human beings like hunting trophies, died when his horse bolted and smashed him into a tree. Days earlier, Samuel had seen him in town and quietly told Dr. Monroe that Drake had killed 12 runaways. He said the voices promised the man would die as violently as the people he'd hunted. Then Catherine Bellamy, who ran a boarding house that served as a holding pen for enslaved people awaiting sale, died in her sleep with her face twisted into a frozen scream. Samuel had told Dr. Monroe that Bellamy poisoned enslaved women who dared cry for their children, and that fear would consume her from the inside until it killed her. And it did. One death was called an accident. One was a stroke. Another was heart failure. But taken together, the pattern was too precise to dismiss. Every victim carried blood on their hands. Every death matched Samuel's warnings. To Dr. Monroe, it felt as if Samuel was a conduit for something ancient, a channel through which the pain and anger of the oppressed finally found justice. Her journals from early 1857 reveal how deeply this shook her. She tested Samuel again and again, searching for some rational explanation. She tested his memory, his eyesight, his ability to pick up faint details, but the truth refused to fit any natural framework. He knew things he couldn't have observed. He understood anatomy he'd never studied. He predicted events no reasoning could foresee. He described past crimes he had no earthly way of learning. In January, she wrote, "The boy possesses knowledge that cannot be explained through science. Either he has a sense that our current understanding cannot define, or he is in contact with something beyond our world. As unsettling as it is, I can no longer dismiss the latter possibility." While Dr. Monroe wrestled with what she was witnessing, the community around her hardened. White residents began to fear Samuel, whispering that he brought death with him, that he was cursed, that Dr. Monroe was a fool to keep him near. But the enslaved population saw something entirely different. They saw him as a vessel, a force of justice sent by God, or by the ancestors, or by something older still. Some called him a prophet. Some believed he was an ancestral spirit reborn. None doubted he was extraordinary. One winter afternoon in February 1857, old Jeremiah, a man who had survived the horrors of family separation and decades of enslavement, came to speak with Samuel. He found the boy sitting by the swamp's edge, staring out over the dark water as if listening to something beneath the surface. Jeremiah said he needed to talk about who Samuel truly was. The boy looked up, already knowing what the old man had come to share: the old ways, the ancestral ways, the knowledge that survived the ocean crossing despite every attempt to erase it. Jeremiah sat beside him and explained that Samuel's gift stretched back generations. His mother had it, and her mother before her. It reached all the way back to Africa. Two people who whispered stories the enslavers tried to beat out of them. Samuel's ability was known by many names. The sight, the walking between worlds, the voice of ancestors speaking through the living. It was real, and it was powerful. But it had always been dangerous for their people. Jeremiah told him that white folks feared anything that proved them wrong, feared the idea that black people could be gifted, intelligent, or connected to a power outside their control. Those who showed too much light were always the first to be destroyed. Samuel listened carefully, absorbing the history that had never been told to him. Yet even as he nodded, he knew Jeremiah's warning might come too late. The voices were growing louder. They were showing him visions beyond the plantations in the town, visions of a country tearing itself apart. He saw rivers of blood, fields filled with fallen soldiers, the chains of slavery shattering, and the long, brutal years that would follow emancipation. He understood that hiding his gift would soon be impossible. The world was shifting, and the voices were preparing him for something far greater than judgment on a few wicked souls. The voices began to show Samuel glimpses of his own future, a life that would burn fiercely and briefly, a flame too bright to survive in a world determined to smother anything it feared. But that revelation only sharpened the turning point that would come in March of 1857, when Samuel met a man unlike any he had seen before. This one carried no murderous secrets, no hidden children in unmarked graves, no past soaked in blood. His name was Benjamin Cole, a slave trader whose arrival in Meow Creek brought 20 chained souls with him. But beneath his polished boots and cold professionalism, his own body was betraying him. Cancer gnawed at him slowly, twisting him in pain from the inside out. He came to Dr. Monroe seeking relief, and the moment Samuel laid eyes on him, the voices erupted in a chaos that nearly made the boy collapse. They didn't cry for vengeance. They screamed warning. "He's like you," they whispered. "He sees what you see. He hears what you hear. But he uses it differently. He uses it to find the weakest, the most vulnerable. He uses it to profit from suffering. He is what you could become if you follow the wrong path." Samuel trembled uncontrollably, fear and recognition mixing inside him like oil and fire. Dr. Monroe rushed to him, but he couldn't speak. Benjamin Cole looked at the boy with eyes that glinted with understanding, the kind that came from living too long with a secret. He smiled, a thin, corrupted smile, and said he had heard the stories. The child who saw death before it came, who exposed sins hidden beneath years of silence. He said he never believed the tales until now, until he saw that unmistakable spark he recognized in himself. Samuel forced out the words that he was nothing like Cole, nothing like the monster the voices had shown him. But Cole laughed, a brutal, humorless sound, and told him the gift wasn't to good or evil. It simply was. Samuel used it to judge. Cole used it to profit. In Cole's eyes, the difference was only one of perspective. For the first time since his mother died, Samuel felt a hollow uncertainty settle in his chest. What if the voices were not ancestral guides or spirits of the dead? What if they were only pieces of himself? What if his anger, his grief, his trauma were shaping the judgments he believed came from beyond? What if he wasn't a messenger, but an executioner shaped by childhood loss? Dr. Monroe sent Cole away with medicine and a grim truth. He would be dead within months. After he left, Samuel finally asked the question that had been building inside him since the moment their eyes met. What if the voices weren't real? What if the justice he believed he was delivering was only vengeance in disguise? Dr. Monroe told him she could not define what the voices were. She only knew the results. Samuel revealed truths that saved lives and uncovered horrors. Cole used the same extraordinary ability to destroy lives and perfect the machinery of slavery. Intentions mattered, she said. They had to matter. It was the only line separating justice from cruelty. But Cole's words took root inside Samuel, and in the weeks that followed, the boy grew quieter, more distant. He still heard the voices, still saw the visions, but he no longer trusted them blindly. Every whisper carried doubt. Every revelation came with the question of whether he was truly an instrument of justice, or simply a wounded child, projecting his rage onto the world. Benjamin Cole died in early May, consumed at last by the cancer he had carried for years. But in death, he left behind something that shook Meow Creek even more than his life had. A letter arrived for Dr. Monroe 3 days later. A confession written in a trembling hand, dense with remorse and the inability to outrun the truth any longer. He described how he used his ability to see into people's souls, to twist their fears, to break their will, to turn them into profit. It listed names, dozens, maybe hundreds, of those he'd torn from their families, with details about where they were sent and what became of them. He admitted that Samuel had seen through him instantly, had held a mirror to a man who had spent decades convincing himself he was a monster. At the end of the letter, Cole begged that she'll tell Samuel he was right, that he should never become what Cole became. He enclosed documents, meticulous records of 2 decades of slave trading, enough information to help abolitionists locate people stolen long ago. Dr. Monroe copied those papers and sent them north, praying they might reunite even a few families. Samuel read Cole's confession and felt a storm of emotions he couldn't untangle. His gift had revealed the truth. He had been right about Cole. But the man's final act had been something unexpected, an attempt at redemption, a sliver of humanity, surfacing too late to save his soul, yet too honest to ignore. Samuel wondered whether the voices cared about repentance, whether judgment could be delayed by remorse, whether any of the people he'd seen die might have lived if they had tried to change before it was too late, and if redemption was possible, even in the final breath. Then what did that mean for the purpose he'd devoted his life to? All through the summer of 1857, those questions haunted him as he lived under Dr. Monroe's roof, still hearing the voices, still seeing the visions, but no longer certain whether they represented truth or merely the echo of his own breaking heart. Samuel's life inside Dr. Monroe's home deepened in complexity as the months passed, his mind expanding even as the weight of his visions grew heavier. She taught him to read and write with a sophistication far beyond his years, placing books on medicine, philosophy, and the natural sciences in front of him, as if hoping knowledge might anchor him to something steadier than the voices that haunted his nights. He devoured everything, absorbing ideas with a hunger born from a desperate need to understand the world and his strange place in it. Yet even with his growing education, the voices did not let him rest. They brought visions that stretched across decades, across lives, across the land itself. In August of 1857, something changed. The visions widened. Instead of whispering the secrets of individuals, they showed him entire nations shifting. He saw armies marching under torn flags, cities burning until the smoke turned to the sky, the color of bruised iron, and rivers running thick and red with blood. He saw black men in Union blue fighting for a freedom that would demand almost unbearable sacrifice. He saw Lincoln's hand, signing documents that would alter the fate of millions, followed by years of terror dressed as reconstruction and new systems, created to keep old cruelties alive under different names. He watched generations rise and fall, each pushing toward justice that always seemed just out of reach. The visions drained him. He began to lose weight, waking in the night screaming, the sound sharp enough to bring Dr. Monroe running to his bedside. One night, shaking and drenched in sweat, he whispered, "They're showing me too much. Doctor, they're showing me what's coming for all of us. There's a war coming, and even after it ends, nothing ends. They'll find new ways to keep us chained." She tried to hold him steady, reminding him he was still just a child, but Samuel only shook his head. Childhood, he said, had left him the moment his mother died, and the voices claimed him. The voices didn't care how young he was. They used him because he could hear them, because he had no shield against their visions. Then came September of 1857, and with it the 9th and final death that would occur during Samuel's brief time in Meow Creek. It began at a social gathering Dr. Monroe reluctantly attended, taking Samuel with her because leaving him alone had become unthinkable. Judge Albert Craner, man feared for the merciless sentences he dealt to enslaved people, was present, surrounded by admirers who praised his strict philosophy of law. The moment Samuel saw him, his body stiffened as if struck by lightning. The voices surged into him, loud enough to tear through his composure. Before Dr. Monroe could stop him, Samuel spoke, his voice slicing through the room's polite laughter. He recited Crane's sins, allowed 47 deaths by hanging, 213 brutal whippings, families destroyed by his judgment sent. He revealed the most monstrous of them all, Crane had sentenced a father to death for killing the overseer who was raping his 15-year-old daughter, ruling that property cannot commit justifiable homicide. A horrified silence fell. Then chaos. Crane demanded the boy's arrest. Men surged forward to seize him, but Dr. Monroe stood between them, her voice cutting through their rage as she defended Samuel with every ounce of authority she possessed. It didn't matter. Crane's fury was low in that room. She knew she had only hours, maybe minutes, before he sent armed men to take Samuel low, lynch him, or worse. The moment they reached her home, she began preparations to smuggle him north to safety. But Samuel, exhausted and hollow-eyed, told her quietly that it wouldn't matter for the judge. He will die in 3 days, no matter where I am. The voices have already set his judgment in motion. Leaving was not to save Crane, it was to save her. That night, with trembling hands, Dr. Monroe gave Samuel forged papers, every coin she could spare, and letters addressed to abolitionist contacts who could guide him toward freedom. Before he stepped into the darkness, she held him close and asked if she would ever see him again. Samuel told her the visions showed many futures, some where they met again, some where they didn't, but in all of them, he remembered her as the only person who saw him first as a child, not a curse. Then he vanished into the night, carried silently through the hidden routes of the Underground Railroad by people who risked their lives to protect children like him. 3 days later, Judge Crane was found dead in his chambers, slumped over his paperwork, his eyes frozen wide in a look of unimaginable terror. Witnesses claimed they heard something before he died, a rising storm of many voices speaking at once, though no one could discern the words. The enslaved people whispered that the souls of everyone he had condemned had finally come to collect their debt. Dr. Elizabeth Monroe continued practicing medicine in Meow Creek until the Civil War broke out in 1861. When Union forces occupied Louisiana in 1862, she volunteered as a physician, treating wounded soldiers from both sides without hesitation or discrimination. During this period, she wrote extensively in her journals about Samuel, trying to understand what she had witnessed during their time together. She even developed a theory that Samuel represented some kind of evolutionary adaptation, an extraordinary survival mechanism born from generations of oppressed people who needed hidden ways to sense danger in a world built to erase them. But even as she tried to create scientific explanations, she admitted she couldn't fully dismiss the possibility that Samuel's gifts were exactly what he believed them to be. Communication from the dead, messages carried by ancestors who refused to let their suffering be forgotten. Dr. Monroe passed away in 1891, but before her death, she arranged for her journals to be donated to a medical college in Philadelphia. She left strict instructions for them to remain sealed for 50 years. She didn't want Samuel to be hunted, exposed, or studied like a curiosity, but she believed future generations might learn something from the careful documentation she left behind. When those journals were finally opened in 1941, researchers analyzed them while exploring the limits of human perception and consciousness. Samuel Carteresquez became the subject of papers in psychology, neurology, and even parapsychology. Yet the journals raised more questions than answers, documenting extraordinary events with precision but offering no clear explanation for how any of it was possible. Samuel Carteresquez's story, however, didn't end when he left Monroe Creek. Reports of a young black boy with uncanny abilities began appearing in northern states in the late 1850s. A child in Pennsylvania diagnosing illnesses with supernatural accuracy. A young man in Massachusetts finding the bodies of murder victims by claiming he could hear their voices. A teenager in Ohio working with the Underground Railroad, somehow always knowing which conductors were trustworthy and which routes had been compromised. Whether all these figures were Samuel or whether his abilities weren't as unique as Dr. Monroe believed remains unknown. During the Civil War, rumors spread of a black scout working with Union forces, a young man who could predict Confederate troop movements and identify spies as if the answers had been whispered to him. Some accounts describe him wandering battlefields after the fighting ended, tears running down his face, speaking softly as though the dead were standing in front of him. Soldiers recalled that he took down final words, names, and messages from the dying, so that their families could be told. Several Union officers mentioned a remarkable young man named Samuel in their correspondence, but military records from the era are incomplete and full of contradictions. After the war, as Reconstruction unfolded, sightings of Samuel became rarer but more haunting. Witnesses claimed he appeared at the sites of racial atrocities, lynchings, massacres, riots where black communities were attacked by white mobs. Survivors spoke of a thin black man with ancient, sorrowful eyes who arrived afterward to record what had happened. They said he wrote down the names of the dead, preserving memories that the official record would try to erase. Some insisted he could identify murderers hiding behind masks and who'd speaking their names with absolute certainty, as though he'd heard them from the victims themselves. One of the most detailed accounts comes from Colfax, Louisiana, where in 1873 a white mob massacred between 60 and 150 black men, one of the deadliest racial attacks in American history. A survivor, Isaiah Freeman, testified in 1920 that after the massacre, a man calling himself Samuel walked among the bodies for hours, speaking to them as if they were still alive. He was taking down their names, Freeman recalled. He said the voices told him who they were, who their families were. He said he was making a record that couldn't be destroyed. When Freeman asked how he could stand to be surrounded by so much death, Samuel answered, "I've been walking among the dead since I was 4 years old. They're no more frightening than the living. Often they're more honest." The last confirmed sighting of someone believed to be Samuel Carter occurred in 1899 in Wilmington, North Carolina, after a violent coup in which white supremacists overthrew the elected government and murdered dozens of black citizens. Alexander Manley, a black journalist forced to flee for his life, wrote that he encountered a thin, exhausted man with eyes that looked like they had seen every terrible thing. The man said he was documenting the massacre for a record that will outlast the lies. When Manley asked for his name, the stranger replied, "I've been called many names. Samuel is the one my mother gave me. It means God has heard. I hope she was right." After 1899, there were no further verified sightings of Samuel Carter, yet his legend lived on in black communities across the South. Parents told stories of him to their children, sometimes as a warning. "Be good or Samuel Carter will know your secrets." Sometimes as hope. No matter what they do to us, Samuel writes it all down. Some believed he had died, finally freed from the burden of the voices. Others thought he learned to silence them and lived an ordinary life. And many believed he was still out there, still walking among the dead, still recording the stories that others tried to erase. Dr. Monroe's journals end with a final reflection written near her death, capturing the mystery and meaning of Samuel's life. She wrote that she spent years trying to understand him scientifically, searching for explanations for abilities that defied reason. But perhaps, she admitted, she had been asking the wrong questions. The point wasn't how Samuel did what he did, it was what his existence meant. He was proof that black intelligence and potential existed in forms the society of his time refused to acknowledge. Proof that suffering sometimes forged abilities the world wasn't ready to accept. Proof that justice, even when denied, finds unexpected ways to reveal itself. Whether Samuel truly heard voices or whether his gift was a form of human perception we still don't understand. The result was unmistakable. Truth was exposed. Crimes were revealed. A child who should have been broken by slavery instead became a force for memory and accountability. His story raises painful questions. How many other children like Samuel were lost in the centuries of slavery? How many brilliant minds were destroyed before they could bloom? How many voices were silenced? Samuel was exceptional, but the system that shaped him was not. Every black child born into slavery faced the same suffocating denial of humanity. Samuel survived because a few people, his mother, Dr. Monroe, the conductors on the Underground Railroad, saw him as human and protected him. For thousands of others, no such protection existed. Their names and their gifts vanished into the darkness of history. In the end, the mystery of Samuel Carter is not about whether his abilities were supernatural. It's about what it means to be human under oppression. It's about how truth survives, how genius survives, how justice survives even when every institution denies it. Samuel may have heard voices from the swamp, or he may have simply been so attuned to the suffering around him that he sensed injustice the way others sense the weather. Either way, his existence terrified the architects of white supremacy because he was living proof that the hierarchy they built was a lie. His intelligence, his gifts, his very survival contradicted every justification for enslavement. That is why his story was buried, why records vanished, why Dr. Monroe's journals were sealed. Samuel Carter was dangerous, not because of how people died around him, but because of what he proved by living, that black humanity Black brilliance and black potential cannot be erased, no matter how brutal the system designed to destroy them. What do you think of this story? Do you believe Samuel Carter truly heard the voices of the Didor? Was his gift something we still don't understand? Have you heard stories in your own family of ancestors who sensed things they shouldn't have known? Leave your thoughts in the comments. And if you found this story powerful, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, and share this video with someone who needs to know the brilliance and resilience our ancestors carried even in the darkest times.